Hey guys, tonight we drift across the wind-brushed grasslands of the Mongolian steppe, under a sky so wide it almost swallows the stars. The ground beneath your feet is dry and soft, still warm from the sun. The scent of horse sweat and wind-whipped grasses clings to the air. Somewhere nearby, a low rhythmic thumping beats against the silence. Not a war drum, not a stampede, just the padded thud of hooves ferrying secrets, messages, and warnings through the dark. You've wandered far from the roads, but that's kind of the point tonight. You're not visiting a palace, not storming a battlefield. You're following the ghost of a message, and that trail leads to something even faster than a horse. Now, let's not kid ourselves. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here, not without frostbite dysentery, or a polite Mongol warrior asking where your travel permit is. But since we're gliding in by dream, you're safe. Safe to follow the scent of tea smoke and wool, safe to hear the creak of wooden wheels and the soft clinking of saddlebags brushing against the side of a cart yurt. Safe to listen in on a forgotten empire's favorite trick, a postal network that could outrun your modern delivery apps by centuries. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is. Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind changes. It always does on the steppe. There's something strange about wind here. It doesn't seem to obey normal rules. It might start in the north, but swing around and pummel you from the east. Or it might fall eerily still just before a new caravan appears over the horizon, its wheels turning silently in the dust. You follow that wind now. It carries a scent of horsehide and charcoal, mixed with something musty and sharp ink maybe, or old paper, or the sweat of someone who hasn't stopped riding for 300 miles. You walk on. The stars above you have names in Mongolian. They call them by the herder's calendar, or after ancient warlords who once painted maps in blood. But here on the ground, what matters is light. And there, flickering just ahead, orange, low to the earth, you spot it. A yurt resting on a wide wooden cart, its felt flaps tied back just enough to let the heat escape. A man steps out. He's not wearing armor, not wearing silk, just sturdy boots, a long robe cinched at the waist, with a sash, and a hat that looks like it's seen better campaigns. He doesn't greet you, just nods, as if your arrival was expected, as if couriers always arrive in the middle of the night. You nod back, trying to play it cool, like you're not mentally cataloging the fact that this is a mobile house, parked halfway between nowhere and somewhere else. Inside, it's warm, not luxurious, but organized. You see stacked rolls of paper, some waxed, some simply dyed leather, a carved bone case that looks suspiciously like it holds imperial orders, a satchel with straps worn from rubbing against galloping hooves, and in the middle, a pot of tea so black it might qualify as ink. He pours you a bowl without asking. The fire crackles. You sit on a rolled felt cushion, your legs stretched toward the flames. The walls of the yurt creak slightly as the wind picks up, but the cart holds. It's heavy, low-slung and padded to absorb the shocks of the wild steppe roads. Not that these riders need roads. They've got a different kind of map, one etched into muscle memory campfire stars and the faint remains of hoofbeats in the grass. The man finally speaks. You know the yam. You shake your head. Empire's bloodline, he says. Mail and spies, taxes and threats all flow through the yam. You sip your tea. It's smoky, a little salty, but hot. And you get the feeling you've just been invited into something sacred, something that doesn't ask your permission. The Mongol Empire didn't invent postal systems, of course, but they perfected something astonishing. Stretching across nearly 8,000 miles of wild terrain, from the edge of China to the forests of Hungary, the yam was a chain of relay stations, horses riders, and mobile posts. It let khans rule across distances that should have crumbled governments. And you're sitting in one of its outposts. The yurt shifts slightly as the wind rocks it. You glance at the walls felt reed-stitched hide, tied to a wooden lattice, so precisely cut, it folds like a fan. You could pack this whole thing up in an hour and be halfway to the next ridge by dawn. Historians still argue whether these wheeled yurts were truly standardized across the empire or improvised by regional commanders. Some say they were reserved for the highest elite couriers. Others believe certain nobles lived in them year-round, turning each movement into a statement of speed and authority. Either way, you can't shake the feeling that this isn't just a house. It's a gear in a machine built to move information faster than empires could react. The man beside you finishes his tea, stands, and without a word begins rolling the felt walls inward. You realize the break was over. The message, whatever it was, must move on. So you step out again, into the cold, into the wind. Behind you the wheels creak and the yurt begins to move. The creak of the cart fades behind you, but the rhythm of movement never stops. You're walking now, gently descending a ridge into a low, mist-filled valley. The morning fog curls around your boots, soft and slow like steam from a tea bowl. A thin path appears beneath your feet, not carved or cobbled, just slightly worn grass, with the odd hoof divot here and there. You follow it. You always follow it. The air is cooler now, the light just beginning to change from deep indigo to gray-blue. And ahead, you see them riders. Not a full cavalry unit. Just 3 or 4 mounted figures spaced out evenly across the valley floor. Each wears a red sash tied to one arm, fluttering faintly as they ride in practiced rhythm. One gallops past you, eyes forward, arms tight around a small leather case. Another slows down just enough to swap satchels with a waiting rider, before thundering off again. This, you realize, is the whisper network of the khans. They called it the yam, short for zam, the old Mongol word for road or route. But it wasn't just a path on a map. It was a full-body experience. It was a system of way stations placed roughly every 20 to 30 miles across the empire, each stocked with horses, food, and fire. Couriers would gallop to a station swap out their exhausted mount for a fresh one, and keep riding. No sleep, no breaks, no turning back. You might think the Pony Express in the American West was impressive, and yeah, it kind of was. But the yam had it beat by centuries in scale. This thing stretched across deserts, mountains, and frozen rivers. And because the Mongols didn't believe in fixed cities, they made the whole system modular, movable, alive, even more curious. You didn't need to be a Mongol to use it. Well, not exactly. If you were a foreign diplomat merchant, or even a scholar with the right credentials, you could be handed a small palm-sized metal token called a garej, a royal pass. It wasn't fancy. Just a thin badge stamped with the symbol of the Khan. But it carried weight. Flash it at a station, and the resources of the empire would open to you. Food horses, shelter, even bodyguards. Sound a bit like Amazon Prime. Well, except this one came with fewer drones, and a much higher risk of being trampled by a runaway goat. You crest another ridge. Ahead is a rest station. It's not much to look at, just a couple of yurts, some hobbled horses, and a pair of iron kettles simmering near a fire. But what you notice are the flags. 3 cloth strips flutter from a pole, each one marked with a different symbol. The imperial tamga, a red horse, and a silver moon. Riders communicate more than messages here. They're also signaling weather conditions, route changes, and sometimes very quietly, military movement. The system was so efficient that reports from the far corners of Asia could arrive at the Great Khan's court in just a few days. Compare that to medieval Europe, where a royal letter might wander across the countryside for weeks, carried by a half-drunk monk on a donkey, who once mistook a goose for God. You sit down near the kettles. One of the station keepers nods at you, then goes back to brushing his horse. No one seems particularly rushed, because this network, this living organism of horse yurt and man, is always in motion, always moving, even when standing still. You think about the logistics. A single messenger riding one horse might last an hour or two at full gallop, before both legs and lungs give out. But by swapping horses at each stop, a rider could cover over 200 miles in a single day. That's basically galloping from Berlin to Amsterdam before dinner, and still having time for a meat dumpling or two. The Mongols didn't invent relays, but they turned them into an art form. Each outpost had not just spare horses, but staff supplies, blacksmiths, and sometimes scribes. Messages weren't just passed, they were protected, decoded, recopied if needed. Sealed with wax or leather, branded with fire, and slotted into carved bone tubes to survive the elements. Historians still argue whether the yam was originally devised by Genghis Khan himself, or evolved slowly under his descendants. Some suggest it may have borrowed ideas from earlier Chinese systems. Others insist it was born directly from the Mongols' nomadic instincts. Because what is a yurt really, but an office on the move? Still seated, you glance over at a wooden crate. It's marked with a simple glyph. Looks like a flame inside a circle. Probably a military dispatch. You're tempted to peek, but you value your fingers. The fire crackles. One of the keepers offers you a small bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside dried, curd, salted yak meat, and something that looks suspiciously like roasted onions. A courier meal. High protein, no fluff. Just enough to keep you from fainting before the next relay. You eat slowly, chew meditatively. Try to imagine yourself riding this path for real. No breaks, no signs, no margin for error. Just speed instinct and the occasional bandit encounter. And yet it worked. For decades, maybe centuries. The yam didn't just move messages. It moved ideas, trade goods, threats, and spies. A single letter sent via yam might arrive with notes on weather patterns, border conditions, or the mood of a provincial governor. Everything was intelligence. Everything flowed. And in the center of this storm of movement, you, sitting by a fire, nibbling old cheese, watching shadows glide over the steppe. You wake with a start, not from a nightmare, but from the sudden hush of everything. The crackle of the fire, the distant hoofbeats, the wind threading through tall grass. It's all paused like the whole steppe held its breath. You blink slowly, brush dust from your eyes, and spot a rider in the dim morning haze. He's not coming toward you. He's already passed. A blur. A smudge of brown and red across the horizon. You barely caught him. That's the point. You rise stiffly, watching as a second rider appears behind him, this one leading a spare horse. He isn't galloping, just trotting relaxed, pacing himself. But the trail he's on, it's lined with stories. You decide to walk beside him for a bit. He nods at you, says nothing. But he doesn't stop you either. He's carrying no visible weapon, no armor, and no luggage beyond 2 tightly wrapped scrolls, tucked into a leather pouch slung across his chest. His horse snorts and keeps moving. So do you. The Yam riders didn't get to rest much. They didn't sleep at the stations unless absolutely necessary. They didn't pause to write poetry. They didn't share philosophical debates with local monks. They had one job move. And move they did. Most messages were relayed in segments. A rider would gallop until their horse was done completely, utterly done, then hand off the message to another waiting courier with a fresh mount. But there were exceptions. Some riders were trusted to run long haul. They'd swap horses, sure, but keep going for hours, even days if the matter was urgent enough. These riders were usually young, often orphans trained from childhood. They slept curled around their saddlebags and ate whatever they could hold in one hand, while still gripping reins with the other. Imagine dashing through a frozen mountain pass while gnawing on goat jerky and trying not to swallow your only written order. Now imagine doing that at full gallop. In winter. With wolves. Yeah, you're going to want a nap just thinking about it. One quirky note horses were sacred, nearly mythical to Mongols. Yet they used them like tools, like living gears in a machine. A yam station might have 50 to 400 horses available at any time, depending on the region, and they weren't all the same. The best were short, muscular, and absurdly durable. Think of them as the off-road vehicles of the animal kingdom, less speed, more staying power. One record tells of a Mongol courier who rode 125 miles in a single day, using 5 horses and 4 different station stops. Others pushed further 200, even 250 miles under imperial order. It was so fast that Marco Polo himself, ever the wide-eyed traveler, reported that he had never seen anything so efficient. And you know Marco, he'd seen a lot. Still, the riders weren't invincible. Sometimes they collapsed. Sometimes their horses did. Sometimes messages vanished, lost in storms, swallowed by rivers, or stolen by ambitious local governors who wanted to edit imperial orders before they reached their targets. Historians still argue whether riders were paid a salary or compensated in rations and royal favor. Some theories suggest they were part-time soldiers or even spies in training. Others think they were civilians, conscripted into service, paid per leg of the route, like freelance gallopers. There are also tales of voluntary riders, men and women, who believed they were doing sacred work by carrying the Khan's words across the world. You squint as the sun brightens. The rider beside you finally speaks. "This leg is easy," he says without looking at you. Flat, soft, wind behind me. You nod, trying not to pant like a tourist. He continues. "Next leg's harder. Ridge is steep. Too many marmots. You weren't expecting marmots to be a factor. But then again, this isn't a video game map. It's the actual landscape full of holes, snakes, and sudden storms." The rider halts abruptly. Ahead, a squat outpost yurt waits beside a split rail corral. A new horse already paws the dirt impatient. No need for paperwork. No awkward conversation. The yurt keeper steps out, grabs the reins of the tired horse, and hands off the next. All in one fluid motion. The rider mounts, and just like that he's off. Gone. No applause. No GPS tracking. Just another whisper in the wind. You're left with the smell of horse sweat and old felt. The yurt keeper offers you water from a goatskin pouch. It smells like something that would cleanse your sinuses forever, but you drink it anyway. Salty, smoky, probably brewed with dried herbs and sheer spite. You glance at a row of markings burned into a wooden post tallies. Each one likely a rider. Maybe a day. Maybe a week. Maybe a warning. You touch the post. It's warm from sun and use. There's something hypnotic about it all. The endless rhythm. The way speed itself was sacred. For the Mongols, communication wasn't about convenience. It was about control. If a command took 2 weeks to arrive, it was useless. If it took 2 days, it could change the world. That's why the yam mattered. That's why riders didn't stop unless they broke something vital like a leg, or a horse, or their own heart. And you're still walking, still trailing along this artery of empire, listening to the echoes of hooves in the dirt. You don't quite know what the next message says, but you're starting to understand why it matters. The sun climbs higher, but the steppe doesn't sweat. Instead, it bakes slowly, lazily, like bread in a stone oven. You're walking alongside another trail now, this one wider, deeper rutted and speckled with dung, that's been neatly shaped into drying discs. Fuel for fires, you realize. Mongols waste nothing. Even the poop has a plan. Up ahead you spot a wide wooden cart, not the kind used to haul grain or logs. No, this one has something more elegant mounted on its back, a full-size yurt painted with faded blue swirls and framed in pale, polished wood. It bounces gently with each turn of the wheels, but it holds. It always holds. You're looking at a portable palace. The Mongols didn't just move messages. They moved homes, families, and sometimes entire government offices. Yurts called jir in Mongolian were round, felt-covered structures made with collapsible lattice frames. They could be packed down in, under an hour, transported on ox-drawn carts or wagons, then rebuilt wherever the need arose. Instant architecture. All-terrain bureaucracy. This one belongs to a mid-level yam administrator. You can tell because the felt is stitched with red thread, and the smoke hole at the top is ringed with bronze. The steps leading up are worn smooth, not from ceremony, but use. Constant, dusty use. You're invited inside. The doorway faces south, always south. That's tradition. Sun warmth protection. You duck beneath the flap and step into a swirl of spice and leather and boiling tea. The interior is spacious, but not cluttered. Scrolls and writing brushes line one side. Dried meats and saddle gear line the other. Mongol pragmatism meets imperial efficiency. Everything in its place. Everything with a purpose. The administrator is not what you expect. She's small, sharp-eyed, and multitasking. One hand cradles a message tube. The other flicks a whip at a lazy dog blocking the entryway. She doesn't stand up, just gestures to a cushion and returns to her notes. "You think we just ride?" she asks, not looking at you. Riders need rest. Messages need record. This is the relay brain. You nod wisely. She snorts. You're lucky you came on a quiet day. 2 weeks ago, this yurt smelled like 40 horses and 3 dead mules. Ah, the romance of the open road. Still, she's not wrong. These yurts weren't just shelters. They were command posts, relay hubs, message clearinghouses. If a rider couldn't continue because of weather illness or too many marmot-related injuries, the message would be copied here, resealed and reassigned. The yam had backups for its backups. If the wind broke your bones, someone else picked up your whisper and ran. You glance around. Glance. There are maps pinned to the inner wall, drawn on hide, marked with symbols that don't quite look Chinese Persian or Turkic. There's something else part pictograph, part code. One map marks paths across the Altai Mountains. Another circles around a dark ink blot, labeled simply, "No horses after rain." One corner of the yurt houses, what looks like a field library, scrolls and bone-bound ledgers, documenting which riders passed, when with what cargo, and whether they arrived fully intact. You brush a finger over one leather cover and nearly sneeze, dust of centuries still clinging. The administrator sighs and finally looks at you. You know, she says, this yurt's been through 4 floods, 1 fire, and 2 weddings. You raise an eyebrow. Don't ask. She waves you out as another rider bursts in. His boots are muddy, one sleeve is torn, and he's panting like he just outran a hawk. He drops a satchel onto a cushion and collapses beside it. No drama, no speeches, just another heartbeat in the system. Outside, you circle the cart yurt again. The wheels are thick, greased with animal fat, and reinforced with iron rings. They creak, but they don't crack. They were built to cross mud snow gravel and the occasional battlefield. If a yurt could survive the conquest of Khwarezm, it could probably survive a toddler tantrum and an earthquake on the same afternoon. One peculiar detail: some of these carts were rumored to carry not just administrators, but entire families of elite messengers, spouses, children, even livestock. Some were said to be double-sized with compartments for cooking and sleeping. And yes, that might sound like a 13th century RV, but with a bit more horsehair and a bit less air conditioning. Historians still argue whether these mobile yurts were used solely by the Mongols, or if they adapted the concept from Turkic steppe cultures. Others think the concept emerged naturally when your life is nomadic. Everything eventually ends up on wheels. You lean against the cart, listening to the ambient soundtrack of empire bells, jingling on distant horse collars, the thwack of hooves against dry turf, the faint whine of wind dragging through grass that hasn't changed in 700 years. There's poetry here buried in the dirt, because this isn't about glamour. It's about functionality. Mongols weren't interested in marble palaces or stained glass windows. They wanted movement, momentum, the ability to break camp before dawn gallop until dusk, and still have a functioning command center at every stop. Yurts were just expressions of that idea. Mobile, minimalist, masterful. You trail your hand along the curve of the felt wall. It's soft but dense, made from sheep's wool pressed and steamed into weatherproof insulation. Warm in winter, cool in summer. Like a giant cozy thermos of power and practicality, a low horn sounds in the distance. The administrator inside the yurt steps out again, nodding to a waiting rider. Message to Karakoram, she calls. South Road. Watch for river ice. The rider nods, takes the pouch, and mounts without a word. Another horse. Another hour. Another whisper launched into the wild. And just like that, the yurt begins to move. The cartwheels fade into the grasses behind you, and now you're alone again. Well, almost. You're standing beneath a crooked tree, the only one for miles, its roots gnarled like an old courier's fingers. At its base lies something half buried in the dust. Curious, you crouch, brush it clean, and uncover a slim, hollow tube of carved bone. It's pale smooth, and smells faintly of leather and age. One end is capped with wax pressed with a tamga, an official seal. The symbol looks like 2 crescent moons joined at the ends. You recognize it. It's the mark of Ogedei Khan Genghis's successor. Your pulse flickers. You should probably leave it alone. You open it anyway. Inside is a tightly rolled strip of bark, still surprisingly pliable. The ink is faded, but not gone written in vertical lines, with symbols that seem more brushstroke than alphabet. You can't read them, of course, but the message feels urgent, like it's still vibrating from the hand that wrote it. A whisper in dried wood. The Mongols didn't have a single writing system. They borrowed and adapted everything. Chinese characters, Uyghur script, Persian calligraphy. Whatever got the job done. Some documents were hastily scrawled in charcoal on thin leather. Others, especially imperial orders, were written on silk or even hammered metal sheets. The fanciest ones, lacquered wood or bone scrolls preserved in watertight containers and tied with colored cords to indicate urgency. Color mattered. Red cord military orders, blue diplomatic, black internal affairs, and not the fun kind. Greenwell historians still argue whether green meant religious messages, plague notices, or maybe just deliver this before it rains. And then there were the messengers themselves, walking encryption keys. Many carried memorized messages instead of physical ones. If intercepted, they could chew up the paper or pretend to be just another dusty herder. But a few had their tongues cut out deliberately. Trusted mute messengers who couldn't reveal a thing even under torture. Fringe tactic. Probably. But Mongols weren't exactly known for subtle HR policies. You tuck the scroll away and continue walking. The terrain here is flatter, breezier, and the grasses seem taller, waist-high waves rippling in every direction. Off to your right, another yurt nestles into the hill like it's grown there. You approach slowly this time, less like a ghost, and more like an honorary courier. You've earned a little strut. A boy outside the yurt is threading thin strips of dried hide into a pouch. He glances up, then gestures you in without a word. Inside, the scent hits you first smoke parchment, and something sweet. Maybe fermented mare's milk. Maybe not. Here, the yurt isn't a living space. It's a scriptorium. Scrolls hang from cords like wind chimes, each bound with delicate strands of horsehair. A table near the center is stacked with open documents, some with elegant calligraphy, others scribbled like grocery lists. And resting in the corner is something strange, a lacquered box with drawers, each labeled with a symbol you don't recognize. You peer inside. Each drawer holds a different writing tool, quills made from eagle feathers, brushes trimmed from wolf-tail sharpened bone, dipped in dry ink. Mongols didn't do fancy inkstands, but what they had portable, efficient, apocalypse-proof. You pick up a piece of bark. It's curved light and surprisingly smooth, probably birch. Early Mongol messages were often inscribed on bark with heated knives, the symbols charred into the surface to resist smearing. Simple, durable, and completely compostable. Eat your heart out, 21st century. You're handed a small pouch. Inside slivers of polished bone, flat rectangular about the length of your palm. Each bears a series of grooves, dots, and what look like tiny burn marks. Are they codes? Dates? Some kind of ledger system? Historians still argue whether these bone tags were primitive punch cards, lunar calendars, or just exceptionally elaborate cattle receipts. But here in the lamplight of the yurt, they feel alive, part artifact, part language, part spell. The Mongols weren't just sending messages across the world. They were building a system of memory, decentralized, redundant, and weirdly beautiful. Their postal system didn't rely on one language, one material, or even one type of person. It was diversity through necessity, and a touch of brilliance. You sit quietly for a moment, watching, as a young girl in a heavy cloak scribbles a note with charcoal onto a narrow piece of fabric. She folds it twice, slips it into a pouch, then threads the pouch into the saddlebag of a waiting pony. She does it all without a sound, without ceremony, because this isn't performance. This is just what they do. One more detail catches your eye, a faded scrap of silk, pinned to the wall, covered in drawings rather than text pictograms of horses' rivers, a crescent moon, and what looks like a hand gripping fire, a visual code, a guide, a warning. You trace a finger across the fabric. It's fraying at the edges, but the ink holds strong, made to last. Outside, a rider whistles. A boy rushes out, hands off a fresh scroll, and just like that, the wind swallows it all again. You're left in the quiet, surrounded by scrolls, bones, bark, and whispers that once spanned continents. The air has changed. There's no green anymore, just beige rust, and the ominous gray. That means a storm is coming, and it's not interested in your schedule. You're walking now in the Gobi. Not the kind of desert with endless sand dunes and camel postcards. This is a cold desert, one where pebbles clink against your boots like scattered coins, and the wind bites like a rumor whispered with malice. You clutch a satchel close to your side. It's the one from the yurt, still warm from the hands that packed it. Inside one scroll, 2 strips of bark, a pouch of salted curd for the journey, and a bone tag etched with what looks like tally marks. You were told not to lose it. You weren't told why. The Gobi doesn't offer signs or comfort, but it offers space and plenty of it. That's what the yam was designed for, to cut through vast, unforgiving landscapes with a system more precise than a compass and more enduring than most marriages. But today, the wind isn't cooperating. It kicks up sharply, flinging grit into your ears, and eyes grinding between your teeth, like sandpaper-flavored gum. You crouch beside a rock outcrop, shielding your face, and wait for the gust to pass. You've seen this before, the infamous Gobi stormfront, a weather tantrum that could erase footprints, yurts, and small animals in a matter of minutes. Then you hear it, a sharp cry from above. Not wind, not human, a falcon. You glance up, squinting through your sleeve, and spot a silhouette slicing across the sky with surgical precision. It circles once, twice, then glides eastward, where another rider gallops across the flats, arm outstretched. The falcon drops quick and efficient, and vanishes from view. You just witnessed Mongol airmail. Well, kind of. The Mongols trained falcons, eagles, and hawks, not just for hunting, but for short-range communication. Tiny scrolls could be tied to a bird's leg, and with enough training and incentive, they could carry these between camps or over dangerous terrain. Not a primary system, but a clever backup, especially in wartime, or when the wolves came. And oh yes, there were wolves. You're told the best yam routes avoided wolf packs. But sometimes, especially in late winter, the paths overlapped. And if you've never heard a wolf howl across the desert at dusk, it's like listening to a love song sung through a blade. Beautiful, chilling. You grip the satchel tighter. It wasn't just wolves that yam couriers had to dodge. There were thieves, rebel villages, rogue lords who didn't feel like playing postal service today. In hostile regions, couriers sometimes carried decoy messages, harmless scrolls stuffed with poetry, or old tax receipts designed to mislead captors. If caught, they'd hand over the decoy offer, a fake route, and pray the captors couldn't read Mongolian script. Historians still argue whether this technique was official yam policy or just rider folklore passed down from older cousins, with a twisted sense of humor. Either way, it probably saved lives. You rise and push forward. The wind's a little calmer now, the ground firmer. You're aiming for a post station carved into a cliff wall, one of the rarer ones designed to blend into the rock and survive the worst of the Gobi's attitude. You reach it just before sunset. The station's guardian is old, like his wrinkles have seen 3 dynasties old. He doesn't speak much, just takes the satchel, opens it, and nods. He gestures you to a low bench. You sit. Tea appears sour and pungent. You drink. He begins copying the scroll by hand. His script is fast, deliberate, and weirdly graceful. You realize this is protocol. Always duplicate the message before sending it forward, in case the next rider becomes a wolf's midnight snack. The words still live on here, safe in this rocky ribcage of the steppe. You sip again. It's salty. Maybe goat. Maybe regret. The man finishes, seals the copy, hands you the original. You're still the courier after all. A knock sounds from the stone entry. Another rider enters, tall, wind-bitten, and carrying a falcon on his arm. The bird stares at you with unnerving focus, like it's memorizing your soul. The man chuckles. She likes new people, he says in broken Chinese. Then adds, or maybe she's hungry. You hope it's the former. He pulls a small pouch from his belt, unwraps a strip of bark, and lays it beside yours. The old man inspects them both, nods, and starts packing supplies into a new satchel. You watch the falcon. It shifts slightly, then stretches one wing out, flicking dust into the air. You wonder what messages it's carried, what warnings it's delivered, what secrets it's seen from above. Some riders claimed the birds understood the Empire better than most humans. Some even whispered that certain falcons were buried with messages still strapped to their legs. Dispatches never delivered meant for Khans who died before the news could reach them. You think about that. You think about all the words that never made it, about how fragile even the fastest system can be. And yet, here you are, bone tag in hand, scroll against your chest, and a falcon watching from the shadows. Still moving, still whispering across the wind. The next morning the sky is a clean sheet, empty, endless and pale as sun-bleached bone. You leave the cliff station behind, scroll still tucked inside your cloak, and follow a trail not marked by signs, but by smell. Yes, smell. You catch it first, as a faint spice in the wind pepper maybe, then a whiff of wool stale vinegar, and the faint sweetness of dried apricot. You're getting close to a merchant caravan, and in the Mongol Empire, that's like wandering into a floating bazaar held together by rope hope and a few too many camels. The yam wasn't just a military asset. It was the backbone of commerce across Asia. And if the Khans were the head of the empire, the merchants were its bloodstream pumping goods gossip and ghee through arteries that stretched from the Yellow Sea to the gates of Vienna. You crest a hill and spot them, a procession of wagons, oxen and cloaked traders, clustered around a central fire. Some sit on bolts of fabric, others squat near bubbling pots, and a few are hammering broken wheels back into shape with the kind of determination only desperation breeds. They see you. You nod. They nod back. A language of shrugs and glances passes between you, and a space opens by the fire. Someone hands you a warm rice ball. Another passes a dented cup of Kumi's fermented mare's milk, tangy enough to clean your teeth and strip paint off a yurt frame. You sip anyway. It's tradition. And also hydration is hard to come by in this part of the world. The merchants are talkative tonight. One a balding man with ink-stained fingers, and a silver tooth leans close and grins. You travel by yam, You nod. He smirks. Then you're faster than fate. But maybe not safer. A cryptic answer. He continues. The yam protects, yes, but it also watches. You know the same station that gives you fresh horse might also count your crates. Another trader, a wiry woman with half a dozen rings on each hand, chimes in. And if you're carrying something interesting like spices, without tax stamps or books with banned poetry, you'll find your next station closed. Just not there. Gone. You blink. The yam, you realize, could also be a filter, a gatekeeper, a throttle on the throat of trade. Historians still argue whether this surveillance element was formalized or just an open secret. Some documents suggest certain yam outposts were instructed to copy merchant inventories. Others insist the whole thing was exaggerated, just grumpy traders angry about losing their raisins. But here by firelight, the tension is real. And yet, they all still use it. Because the alternative is much worse. Without the yam, caravans are vulnerable to bandits' weather and simple misdirection. The Mongol relay network, for all its scrutiny, provided safety speed and the illusion of order. Messengers might pass your path and signal if a route was blocked. Station guards could offer supplies or help your wounded camel limp to the next post. And crucially, letters of credit could move faster than your goods. Imagine you're a silk trader in Chang'an. With the yam, you can send word ahead to Samarkand, alerting your partner there that 40 bolts of crimson brocade are on the way. By the time you arrive months later, your warehouse is rented, your buyers are lined up, and someone's already been bribed. All because the message got there first. It's like 13th century FedEx meets insider trading. One of the merchants pokes the fire with a twisted stick. I once sent a message to Bukhara, he says. Took 8 days. 8. His tone is reverent, like he's remembering his first love. The message arrived. I didn't. They all laugh. Because that's how it goes out here. Words outpace people. And sometimes they live longer. Another merchant opens a bundle, tiny scrolls tied with red thread. Purchase orders, transaction lists. And what looks like a poem written in Persian on the back of a grain invoice. You realize many of these travelers double as couriers, unofficial extensions of the yam, moving low-priority or private messages alongside sacks of walnuts and bolts of wool. Some even carry whispers, meant never to be read, love letters between star-crossed nobles, spy reports disguised as children's riddles, threats veiled in gift receipts. You hold one of the scrolls to the firelight. The paper is thin, brittle, but covered in a delicate curling script. At the bottom, a stamp shaped like a fishhook. No one explains it. They don't have to. The yam was fast, yes, but it wasn't neutral. And that's the part the merchants knew best. They tell you stories of couriers who vanished after delivering bad news of messages that were intercepted, and edited of packages that grew heavier or lighter between stations. One even claims a cursed scroll, made it halfway to India, before everyone who touched it mysteriously fell ill. You raise an eyebrow, but she just shrugs. Could have been spoiled cheese, she says. But I burned my gloves just in case. You stay with them that night, wrapped in blankets that smell like goat leather and something aggressively floral. You dream of packages galloping on their own legs, of falcons with satchels tied to their claws, of messages that breathe. And when you wake, the caravan is already gone. No footprints, no smoke, just a warm spot in the grass, and a single coin tucked beside your pack, a silent thanks, or maybe a warning. The yam always moves, and so do you. You've been walking for hours, your legs tired, your shoulders aching from the weight of the satchel. The sun is retreating now, bleeding out behind a ridge of low hills. The steppe cools quickly. Daytime heat drains away like water through cracks, leaving the air crisp, a little sharp, and not entirely welcoming. But then you see it. A flicker of light ahead, low and steady. Not fire left by accident, a fire with intent. You quicken your pace, drawn by the promise of warmth, and as you crest the hill, you find it a yam relay station, built around a postal yurt half dug into the earth to shield it from the wind. You knock politely, because even in the 13th century steppe manners matter. The door flap opens, and you're greeted by a plump, weathered woman with soot on her cheeks and a ladle in her hand. "You're late," she says, squinting at you like she's expecting someone better. Then she grunts and waves you inside. The yurt is warm, cluttered, and smells like goat cheese fire smoke and the ancient musk of too many wool blankets. A pot bubbles at the center, suspended over a small fire pit. Around it sit 3 riders slouched in familiar exhaustion. One is snoring softly. Another is sharpening a knife against the edge of a cup. The third looks up as you enter and nods. You with the scroll, you nod back. That's all it takes. In this world, a message is as good as a passport. You're handed a bowl of tea before you even sit down. It's salty. Of course it is. Mongol tea was made with brick tea melted into boiling water and seasoned with salt, sometimes with added butter or milk. It tastes comforting, in the way a punch to the gut is comforting once you stop crying. But it's hot, and your hands welcome it. A wooden plate slides toward you. On it, dried meat, possibly horse 2 flat seed cakes, and a suspiciously beige cube that the woman calls goat cheese. It squeaks when you chew it. You chew it anyway. Around you, the riders talk, not to you, but around you, over you. Your furniture with ears. Perfect. Did you hear about the letter that went missing near Lake Baikal? One mutters. Another one says the knife guy. That's the 3rd this month. The first rider chuckles without opening his eyes. Maybe the lake's collecting them, building an archive. They all laugh softly. It's a courier joke. You don't get it, but you laugh too. Then comes the gossip. Apparently, a nobleman in the east sent a letter asking for more horses and fewer taxes. It was copied 3 times, but only one version reached the court. The other 2 were lost, and by lost they probably mean intercepted and edited by someone whose name they won't say out loud. Another tale involves an imperial bride who sent a message to her cousin about certain deficiencies in her new husband. The letter was meant to be private. It wasn't. It now circulates among the relay stations like a folk ballad. You're beginning to understand that the yam doesn't just carry power, it listens to it. One of the riders leans over and shows you a folded scrap of parchment. On it, a doodle of a yurt with legs running like a chicken. It's the new model, he says. Faster. Built for messages that yell instead of whisper. More laughter. Then silence. Someone shifts. Another pours tea. The older woman returns with a pouch of crushed herbs. She tosses a handful into the fire pit, and suddenly the whole yurt smells of mint and ash and something else, lavender maybe, or wormwood. You feel your eyelids drooping. Your bones soften. The warmth presses into you like a friend who doesn't understand personal space. There's something timeless here. The crackle of the fire, the soft chime of metal tools being cleaned, a snore, a slurp, a grunt. The music of a postal outpost, equal parts sanctuary and surveillance. Riders pass through rest and move on, but the yurt remembers. The walls carry whispers. messages that never made it, voices that grew tired halfway home. Historians still argue whether some yam stations became semi-permanent villages, slowly collecting people who didn't want to keep riding. They say some became market hubs, others shrines, and a few simply disappeared, buried by time war or sandstorms. But this one feels like it's always been here. You shift slightly, trying to find a less lumpy part of your cushion. No luck. It's all goat hide and mystery lumps. But the warmth holds you in place, and soon your thoughts begin to melt, like the cheese cube you regretfully finished earlier. Someone begins humming. A low, tuneless sound. Maybe it's a lullaby. Maybe it's a warning. It doesn't matter. You're slipping into sleep now, and your last thought is of scrolls curling gently beside a hearth, waiting for morning legs to carry them away. The yam doesn't stop, but tonight it pauses, just long enough for you to dream. You rise before dawn, stiff and slightly smoky like a forgotten campfire log. The yurt is quiet, but not empty, just drowsy. One of the riders from last night is already gone. Another is pulling on boots with the expression of a man who's reconsidering all his life choices, starting with the one where he agreed to gallop 120 miles with saddle sores. You step out into the still gray morning and start walking again. The step at sunrise is a thing of silence and frost, as if the world hasn't quite decided whether to be kind or cruel today. Your breath curls in front of you in tiny clouds, and each footstep crunches lightly on the frost-kissed grass. An hour in, you spot something curious in the dirt, a small bundle of rope. At first glance, it looks like someone dropped their lasso. But as you pick it up, you see the knots, dozens of them, tiny, precise in different sizes, and tied in complex patterns. Some are close together. Others are spaced by long gaps of plain cord. You run your fingers along it slowly. It's not decorative. It's a message. Maybe. Or maybe you've just found someone's old laundry string. But your instincts say otherwise. You loop it over your shoulder and continue until you find your next stop a modest half-sunken outpost near a cluster of low shrubs. This one's quieter than most. Fewer people, fewer horses. One dog who looks at you like you owe him rent. Inside, an old man with eyes like wet gravel examines the knotted cord as you hold it out. He doesn't speak right away, just tilts his head and traces the knots with a single calloused finger. Then he grunts. Numbers, he says. Mostly, but not all. You raise an eyebrow. He hands it back and gestures to a wall hanging a faded cloth with a pattern of stitches and symbols. Knots, he says again. Used to be more common, back in the early days, for couriers who couldn't read, or when you couldn't risk paper. You sit beside the hearth. The fire pops, sending tiny sparks up into the smoke hole. The old man continues without invitation. The Mongols, he says, may have invented their own version of the quipu, a knotted string communication system, most famously used by the Incas half a world away. Of course, there's no hard proof they borrowed it. No Mongol Inca trade summit in the archives. But the similarities are strange. Historians still argue whether it was a coincidence, an independent invention, or the result of some long-lost step to Andes cultural drift. Fringe scholars whisper about ancient northern tribes using similar cords to record hunting tallies, supply counts, or battle formations. Works better than ink in the rain, the man adds, poking at the fire. You nod, considering the possibilities. It makes sense. A knotted string doesn't smear, doesn't tear, can't be read without training. And even if intercepted, it's easy to pretend it's just a random piece of rope. Primitive encryption. You reach into your pouch and pull out one of your own scrolls. Suddenly it feels too loud, too vulnerable. Ink on hide can lie, but knots don't forget. The man gets up and shuffles to a trunk. From inside he pulls a bundle of similar cords, older, stiffer, some dyed faintly red or green. He shows you one with a specific pattern. 3 tight knots a wide space, then 2 looser knots. Horse count, he says. 3 at first, stop. 2 at second. 1 broke its leg. Another, a long string with 1 large knot. Then a cascade of tiny, almost imperceptible ties. That one's a name, he says. Mine. You study it. The logic is elusive but tangible, like music in another key. You're not sure if you understand it, or if your brain just wants to believe you do. But either way, you're holding something precious. Not official, not standardized, but living. The riders of the Yam weren't just couriers, they were data handlers. Each had a preferred method. Some used scrolls, some bark, some bone. And a few, like this quiet man beside the fire, used string. Language twisted into fiber. He lets you try one. You fumble at first, your knots too tight, your spacing uneven. But with a bit of coaching and a muttered curse or two from your instructor, you make a message 3 deliveries, 1 rider, no losses. You tie it to your belt. Not because it's useful, but because it feels right. A charm, a logbook, a signature. Outside, the sky has shifted from gray to pale gold. Another rider approaches the outpost, their silhouette a smudge against the light. You hear hooves thudding over frost-crusted ground and the sharp jingle of reins. Before you leave, the old man presses a single cord into your palm. 1 knot, 1 message. For memory, he says. You tuck it away, because sometimes words aren't the only way to carry meaning. And in the world of the Yam, even rope can whisper across an empire. The wind shifts again, but this time it carries a scent you haven't smelled before rosemary smoke, and something floral, maybe iris or steppe poppy. It trails through the air like a thread, guiding you toward a hilltop speckled with white dots. From a distance, they look like sheep. Closer, they reveal themselves yurts. 5 of them, arranged in a circle like a flower in bloom. Something feels off. You approach slowly. There's no smoke rising from the flues. No tethered horses nearby. No voices, just stillness. And then like a magician pulling back the curtain, you spot it. The yurts aren't real. Well, they're real enough, made of wood frames and felt and all the familiar wrappings. But they aren't occupied. They aren't used. And they certainly aren't cozy. They're decoys. You walk around the perimeter, your boots crunching lightly over gravel. 1 yurt has a flap pulled back. Inside, nothing but straw, a few empty pots, and a crude wooden table. It's all for show. A message without content. A mirage. This was a trap. And not just any trap, a postal trap. A military tactic. A baited yurt village used to confuse, distract, or even ambush enemy scouts or rogue riders. The Yam wasn't only about speed, it was also about deception. You circle the fake camp in quiet awe. Who set this up? Why here? And then just beyond the last yurt you find her. A woman sits on a small stool plucking feathers from a dead goose. She doesn't look up. You took your time, she says. The wind's been waiting. You hesitate. She gestures to a smaller yurt behind her, half hidden by scrub. You want stories? I have them. But only if you help with the goose. A fair trade. Inside her yurt, things are far more lively. Scrolls hang from cords. There are maps and bone tubes like before, but also strange tools. Whistles bits of mirror-polished stones tied with red string. And in the corner, a stack of masks. She tells you her name, but not the real one. Everyone has two, she says. One for the Khan, one for the crows. She's a courier, but also something more. Spy, signal woman, ghost in the system. She used to ride, she says, back when her legs were younger and her enemies fewer. Now she trains others, especially girls. Because here's the thing no one tells you. The Yam was full of women. Not in the scrolls, not in the court records, but on the road, absolutely. Some were official riders. Some carried food supplies or messages from their husbands. Some rode for revenge, others for information. And a few, like her, rode for secrets. She pours you tea this time, laced with something sweet honey, or maybe fermented fruit. The cup smells like flowers and stories. You sip. There were always spies in the Yam, she says. Some were obvious. Some pretended to limp so they could stop at every station without suspicion. She chuckles. One man faked a toothache for 6 weeks. Carried a message in his mouth the whole time. Rolled it so small it looked like a seed. You wince. Still better than swallowing it, she adds. You ask about the fake yurts outside. They're for testing, she says. We set them up along less used routes to lure in bandits. Or curious fools. You'd be amazed what people reveal when they think no one's listening. She tells you about signal codes using mirror flashes, colored scarves, and kites. About riders who wore bells and patterns to send warnings as they galloped. About empresses who sent messages not with ink, but by rearranging flower petals in imperial gardens. A subtle language of color bloom and scent. Historians still argue whether these stories are fact legend or something tangled in between. Some scholars dismiss them as folklore. Others believe they point to a hidden layer of Yam operations, quiet, decentralized, deeply human. You watch as she unrolls a strip of silk, covered in tiny knots dyed blue at one end and red at the other. A love letter, she says, from a general to his spy wife. Never delivered. She died at the southern checkpoint. He disappeared. I keep it as proof that words are heavier than swords. You sit in silence. The tea cools. Outside the wind kicks up again, rattling the decoy yurts, and sending one flap fluttering like a startled bird. She gathers her tools, tucks the featherless goose into a pot, and offers you a mask. For when you don't want to be seen, she says. You take it. It's simple, felt-stitched leather, and 2 eye holes that see more than they should. Then she adds, wear it when you reach the next ridge. The station there doesn't always recognize new faces. You blink, but she's already at the fire, humming an old tune that sounds like it has thorns. You step outside. The yurts remain still, like statues holding their breath. The mask itches your fingers, and somewhere behind you, the wind whispers, even silence rides the Yam. The air shifts again, no longer sharp with wind, but heavy with moisture. You climb the ridge she warned you about, the mask tucked into your coat. The ground underfoot grows soft, spongy. Patches of old snow cling to the northern slopes, like forgotten sheets, and the sky grumbles quietly, not yet ready to cry. This is where the Yam meets its most ancient enemy, weather. The Mongol couriers rode in all conditions. Rain, snow, dust storms, hail. You name it. The Empire didn't pause for a blizzard. Orders still needed to move. Riders still had to ride, but not all made it. You reach the summit and see the remnants of a way station, a collapsed yurt. The roof caved in, felt shredded by years of wind and teeth. One side is buried in drifted snow. Beside it stands a wooden marker carved with a simple horsehead figure. Not a gravestone exactly, but close, a memorial. You walk around it slowly. In the slush, your boots squelch with a sickening squish. Then you spot it half hidden in the shadow of a rock. A leather satchel, cracked, frozen stiff, still sealed with a bone clasp. You kneel and brush snow away from the faded flap. The cord breaks at your touch, brittle with time. Inside there's a scroll, fused shut. Ink bled from years of damp and pressure. It's unreadable now, just a ghost of a message never received. A whisper lost in frost. The writer who carried it, long gone. Historians have found more than one yam station buried in snowfields or sunk in seasonal floods. Some were only discovered centuries later, unearthed by archaeologists or shepherds, still holding messages that never made it. Unsigned, undelivered, unanswered. The Mongols had protocols for bad weather. Riders were expected to carry furs, flint, and dried food enough to survive a few days if stranded. Some stations stocked extra gear. Others were deliberately built near caves or thermal springs. But when the steppe turned against you, even the best preparation could mean nothing. You feel it now, a sting of wind across your cheek. Snow begins to fall, light at first, then thicker, slower. You take shelter inside what's left of the yurt. The walls are warped. The smell of rot clings to the air like old regret. But it's still standing, just enough to keep the cold at bay. Inside you find old tools, a flint striker, a broken cup, scraps of felt too damp to burn, and a diary. Not a fancy one, just a thin packet of stitched hide containing scraps of thoughts. Some notes are in Mongolian, others in Chinese. One in Persian simply reads, "Still snowing. No rider arrived. We'll try again tomorrow. Fingers hurt." You close the book and tuck it gently into your coat. Maybe someone should read it. Maybe someone already has. The snow picks up. Outside the trail is gone swallowed whole in white. You understand now why the yam needed such ruthless redundancy, why messages were copied at each stop, why backup riders waited, because no matter how fast or fearless the system was, nature always had the final say. Some routes became infamous. Riders spoke of a pass in the far west, where horses refused to gallop, sensing death in the wind. Others mentioned a frozen lake that swallowed entire carts without a ripple. And still, others whispered of ghost riders, couriers, who died mid-route, but were seen again weeks later, still galloping eyes, hollow scroll in hand. Folk tales maybe, but when you're sitting in a snow-drowned ruin wind, howling through torn felt walls, they don't feel like stories. They feel like warnings. You sip from your canteen. It's half frozen. You chew a piece of goat jerky and think about the message in your pouch. Dry, intact, alive, for now. There's a strange kind of faith involved in the yam. You don't always know if your words will arrive, but you send them anyway. You ride, you trust. You rise again, stepping out into the snow. The world is quieter now, muffled, wrapped in white. Each breath fogs and clings. You tighten your coat and start downhill eyes on the horizon, where the clouds break faintly in the east. Somewhere ahead, there's another station, another rider, another fire. But for everyone who made it, there were those who didn't. You pass another marker carved into the rock, just a name half faded. Maybe it's a grave, maybe just a tribute. Either way, the yam remembers, even in snow, even in silence, even when no one else does. The snow tapers off by midday, melting into mist that beads on your coat and softens the horizon. The ground here is no longer pure steppe. It's rougher, broken by rocky mounds and occasional outcrops of exposed earth. You've wandered off the usual yam path now, not by accident, but by something that feels almost like instinct. A pull, a whisper in your bones. Then you see them. A line of tall stones standing upright in a gentle arc, across a hilltop each carved with strange markings. They aren't part of any building. No fences, no ruins nearby. Just stones. Alone. You climb toward them slowly, the silence growing heavier with each step. There are 12 in all, though some lean at odd angles. Others have sunk into the soil, tilting like they're listening to secrets underground. At first, the carvings are hard to make out, but as you brush snow and lichen from the nearest, the shapes emerge: a belt, a dagger, a bow, a horse, and oddly, antlers. These are deer stones. They scatter across the Mongolian landscape, like punctuation marks left by an ancient hand. No one's entirely sure who made them. Some date them to 1,000 years before the Mongols, possibly to the Bronze Age. But they lingered into the time of the Khans, and even the Yam riders passed them often enough to give them names. This one has a long slash at its base, as if someone tried to dig it up and failed. The top is capped with a circular groove, like a halo worn into the rock. Another stone nearby is shorter, smoother with delicate carvings of hooves and arrows running up its length. You sit in the cold grass and stare. Historians still argue over what deer stones were for. Some say they marked the graves of warriors, standing as eternal guardians for the brave. Others believe they were spiritual waypoints, carved to guide the souls of the dead. Still others suggest they honored couriers, those who rode so far and fast that not even death could catch them easily. The antlers may symbolize speed, or nobility, or transformation. You prefer the last theory, because here's the thing about the yam: it wasn't just movement, it was metamorphosis. Riders became messages, horses became wings, paths became memory. You run your fingers along a shallow spiral etched into the stone's midsection. The groove is smooth, like it's been touched 1,000 times, maybe by messengers seeking luck, maybe by survivors saying goodbye. There's one more possibility. Some researchers believe deer stones had nothing to do with death at all, that they marked sacred lines of energy across the land, geomantic routes that the yam consciously, or not later, followed. The Empire may have piggybacked its postal network onto a spiritual map, far older than itself. Which means the messengers weren't just traveling across space. They were following echoes. You rise and walk along the row of stones. At the far end you find a small pile of offerings, pebbles, bones, and a tightly knotted strip of rawhide. Someone's been here recently. You leave a piece of jerky in the pile, and nod once, not sure who you're nodding to. But it feels right. The wind picks up, dry now, brushing your cheeks like an old friend. You descend the hill, deer stones fading behind you, but their presence lingers. As you reach flatter ground, you meet a young herder. She's riding a sturdy pony wrapped in wool, cheeks red from wind. She doesn't speak, but hands you a gourd of hot liquid and gestures west. No words, just direction, as if she knows where you're going before you do. You sip. It's tangy herbal, probably fermented something. It burns, but it helps. You ride with her for a while. She whistles occasionally short, sharp tones that make the pony veer right then left. At one point, she taps her knee 3 times, and a small hawk appears from the clouds above, spiraling downward before vanishing again. A message, a check-in. Who knows? Before long, she stops and points to a cluster of trees below. Another relay station. Smoke rises faintly. A good sign. You dismount. She nods once and rides off without a word, disappearing as quickly as she arrived. You look back toward the ridge. The deer stones are hidden now, but you still feel their gravity. Because while the yam may be remembered for speed, its deeper magic was in its stillness, its landmarks, its lore, its stubborn stones that refuse to be forgotten. Messages fade, riders fall, but the stones remain. By now your boots have lost any concept of softness. The step is rock hard beneath your soles, no matter how grassy it looks from afar. But you're used to it. The rhythm of walking, pausing, riding, waiting, it's all sunk into your bones, like the taste of salty tea and the constant itch of dust behind your ears. You arrive at another post station. This one is oddly lively, filled with travelers who clearly don't belong to the steppe. Their clothes are heavier, clumsier. Their boots don't flex the right way. Their accents, when they speak, fall on your ears like chipped stone. They're European. You eavesdrop naturally. It's the proper yam tradition. A short man with an ink-stained satchel is gesturing wildly with his hands. "They knew we were coming," he says in a thick, rolling accent. "Before we crossed the border, they met us with horses, fresh ones, told us what route we would take. We hadn't even agreed on it yet." Another nods, stunned. They had our names. They knew which abbey sent us. They even knew that Brother Luca snores. Everyone laughs, including Brother Luca, who clearly does. You sidle closer and sit beside a bundled-up scribe, holding a leather-bound notebook. He glances over, raises an eyebrow, and mutters, "Fastest system I've ever seen. Quicker than rumor. Spookier, too." The scribe flips his notebook open and shows you a sketch diagram, a line of yurts evenly spaced each with a rider darting between them like beads on a string. Next to it, he's scrawled, "Why can't Europe do this?" An excellent question, because when European envoys, monks, merchants, and spies began encountering the Yam in the 13th and 14th centuries, it absolutely shattered their idea of what communication could be. In Europe, messengers could take weeks, months to cross a kingdom. Letters might vanish. Riders could get drunk, arrested, or worse. The roads were slow, the horses unreliable, and the idea of state-run postal stations unheard of. But in Mongol territory, information flowed with mechanical regularity. Orders sent from Karakorum arrived in Kiev faster than we could return from the bathhouse, one Venetian merchant reportedly wrote. And we did not bathe slowly. Some envoys suspected magic. Others blamed spies. A few insisted the Mongols had trained spirits or invisible birds. When the reality relay station's fresh horses and obsessive record-keeping was explained to them, it only made things worse. They write everything down, a Genoese traveler once noted, even things I said in jest. A week later, someone in the next city quotes me exactly. I had no idea I was being taken seriously. One French diplomat went home and declared that the Mongols had a network of living mirrors that reflected messages across the sky, which, okay, creative, but not accurate. What really unnerved Europeans was the predictability. In Europe, messengers were expected to fail. Everyone accounted for delay, but the Yamut worked, and it worked every time. Letters sent from one side of the empire to the other arrived in days, not months, and they arrived on schedule. The system was so respected that even during wars, enemy states would sometimes allow yam riders to pass unmolested, because interrupting the flow of information was seen as a worse offense than espionage itself. One Hungarian priest recounted seeing a rider gallop through a besieged village, wave a silver medallion, and pass through unscathed. No one stopped him. No one wanted to. He was part of something too big to challenge. You watch the Europeans sip their tea awkwardly. One grimaces. Another adds honey. A third tries to pretend he likes it. Do they use this for love letters too? Someone asks. The older Mongol sitting in the corner snorts and mutters. Only if the love is urgent. The scribe scribbles that down too. Historians still debate how much the yam influenced later European systems. Some say it directly inspired the development of state postal services in the Habsburg lands and the Ottoman Empire. Others argue the cultural gap was too wide, that Europe couldn't quite grasp the Mongol obsession with logistics and timing. But something clearly changed. After the encounters, you begin to see scribes traveling with diplomatic envoys, people who measure distances, people who sketch maps, people who copy everything, because they've seen what information can do when it moves fast. And the fear lingers. A Polish envoy reportedly said, "I worry less about Mongol arrows than their letters. The arrow kills one. The letter commands thousands. You sip your tea. No honey, thank you. And look around the post station. One rider slips through exchanges scrolls and is gone in under a minute. Another quietly speaks to the station master checking a list. A pigeon lands briefly on the yurt's ridge, then flutters off. Even now, centuries later, the yam leaves visitors feeling slightly outpaced, slightly outclassed. Because it wasn't just a network. It was a system that knew. And knowing then as now is everything. You leave the chattering post behind its stories, still echoing in your ears, and step into a landscape that feels quieter. Not just physically, but historically. The grass is taller here, the paths fainter, and the wind less sure of itself. You follow an old trail anyway, a shallow groove in the dirt barely more than a memory. You're walking the ghost of the yam. The Mongol Empire didn't last forever. No empire does. But the yam with all its elegance and endurance didn't vanish in a blaze. It faded, slowly, softly, like a lantern allowed to burn out rather than smashed. You crest a low hill and see a sight both familiar and tragic, the collapsed frame of a postal yurt half swallowed by earth. Its lattice ribs jut up like the bones of a long-dead animal. One wheel-wooden iron bandit lies nearby, rusted clean through and half-claimed by moss. You approach, carefully, respectfully. Inside what remains is faint, the scraps of scrolls long decayed, a broken pot, a cracked seal once used to mark dispatches. In the corner, an old chest locked, but the lock rusted away with time. You lift the lid. Inside nothing but dust and the faint, faded impression of something that used to matter. The empire fractured over generations. Different khanats rose and fell. Persia, Russia, China, each region pulled the yam in a different direction. Budgets shrank. Borders hardened. Horses became more valuable for war than words. Some stations simply stopped receiving new orders. So they waited, and waited, until one day the last rider didn't come. You move on through a corridor of wind-worn trees, scraggly defiant. The path is overgrown, now crisscrossed by animal trails. You pass a ring of stones once used to anchor yurts, and catch the glint of something metallic in the grass. A badge, a jerej, half buried, bent. Someone once carried this, and was owed fresh horses' meals shelter. Now it's just a trinket. You clean it gently and slip it into your pouch. Not for value, for remembrance. Historians still argue where the last true leg of the yam operated. Some say it persisted in Yuan China into the 14th century. Others believe fragments survived in Central Asia for decades longer, even after the empire was little more than memory. Postal systems were copied and continued, but the original heartbeat, the one that started with Genghis Khan and a few tired riders under starlight, that eventually went quiet. You reach a small stream, barely more than a trickle now. An old stone marker lies cracked on its bank, worn so smooth by centuries of rain that its inscription has been polished into forgetting. You sit beside it, dip your hands in the water. The sun sets slowly, long and red and low. Nearby a wild horse watches you from the ridge mane, tousled by the windhoofs firm in the dust. For a moment, it feels like a rider might crest the hill behind it, scroll tucked in one sleeve, eyes fixed forward. But no one comes. The trails have faded, the yurts have rotted, the wheels have rusted and collapsed into soft soil. But the idea, the sheer audacity of it all, still hangs in the air. That a network could stretch across a continent without steel, without engines, without a single printed timetable. Just horses, humans, and hope. You walk again slowly now. The stars begin to appear one by one, cold and brilliant in the evening sky. You remember something you heard once, perhaps in a yurt, perhaps in a dream. The message outlives the messenger, and sometimes it does. Night falls gently, like a soft wool blanket draped over the steppe. The stars are sharp, bright, and endless, a celestial map that has guided riders for centuries. You come upon a solitary yurt, small and smoke-stained, nestled in a shallow hollow, surrounded by wind-whipped grasses. The smell of burning wood drifts toward you, inviting and familiar. Inside, a fire flickers low, casting long shadows on felt walls, worn thin by time. An old man sits cross-legged near the hearth, his face a tapestry of wrinkles and stories. His eyes glimmer with the faint light of fading embers and memories. He looks up as you enter. "You come late," he says, voice rough but steady. But there's still time. You settle beside him, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet. He pulls a crumpled piece of paper from the folds of his robe. Its yellowed, fragile inks, faded but still legible. "This," he says, "is the last letter." You lean in, curious. "It was sent when the empire was already crumbling," he continues. "The roads were broken, horses scarce, the stations abandoned one by one. But someone still cared. They needed to speak." He unfolds the letter slowly, tracing the words with a trembling finger. The script is formal, desperate. A plea for mercy, a call to remember old alliances, a hope that the empire's reach could stretch one last time, not with armies, but with words. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the yurt's walls like distant thunder. The old man sighs. The rider who carried this never made it. He gestures toward the door where the night swallows the horizon. Some say he died in the snow, others that he vanished into the dust storms. No one knows. The letter was found years later, buried beneath a collapsed post. You sit with that silence. The fire crackles once, then settles. The man looks at you and smiles faintly. The yam never really stopped. It just changed. Messages became stories. Stories became legends. And the legends, well, they ride on. You nod. The fire dims. You watch the embers fade to ash. Outside, the steppe stretches wide and dark, waiting for the next whisper, the next rider, the next flame to catch. And in that waiting, there is peace. The last message has been sent. But the story never ends.